In 2019, 88% of every transaction on this planet involved the United States dollar. Let that number sink in. 88%. This isn't just market dominance, it is total, systemic coercion. Nations do not use the dollar because they want to, they use it because they have to. The world operates under the illusion of free trade, but in reality, every major economy is trading inside an invisible cage constructed by the United States back in 1944. Look at the commodities that run our civilization: oil, gold, coffee. They are all priced in dollars, regardless of where they are dug up or where they are consumed. It doesn't matter if you are a lumber supplier in Canada or a real estate developer in France. Your assets do not truly belong to you until a computer server in New York validates the transaction. Until the moment that digital ledger updates on American soil, your wealth is just a theoretical concept. This system was designed for stability, but one man turned it into a gun. Donald Trump did not build this financial empire, but he was the first president to openly weaponize it against the world. When he withdrew from the Iran deal in 2018 and reimposed sanctions, he didn't just use diplomacy, he used the dollar's ubiquity to cut off entire nations from the global bloodstream. He revealed the kill switch hidden in the plumbing of global finance. This is the untold story of how a piece of green paper imprisoned the global economy. And more importantly, it is the investigation into why that decision in 2018 has activated a ticking time bomb set to detonate the current financial order by 2026. If you do not understand this mechanism, you are not just an observer. You are the next victim of the greatest wealth transfer in history. To understand the weapon, we must first understand the battlefield. And in the modern world, the battlefield is not geography, it is currency. The global financial system is often presented as a diverse marketplace of competing economies. That is a lie. It is a monopoly. In 2019, data revealed a staggering reality. Some 88% of all international transactions involve the US dollar. No other currency even comes close to this level of saturation. When nearly 9 out of every 10 cross-border deals require a specific currency, that currency is not just money, it is the operating system of the entire planet. This dominance grants the United States extraordinary power over essentially anyone, anywhere, who imports or exports anything. Consider the raw materials that keep civilization running. Commodities like oil, gold, and coffee are all priced in dollars, regardless of where they are extracted or where they are consumed. Even if a Brazilian coffee grower sells to a Vietnamese distributor, the value of that transaction is calculated in American dollars. The dollar is the lens through which the world measures value. This means that every nation, friend or foe, is forced to hold, trade, and respect the greenback simply to survive. But how did a single nation achieve this hegemony? It was not accidental. It was engineered. Go back to 1944. World War II was nearing its end, and the major powers gathered at Bretton Woods. The United States, possessing the only major economy left standing and the bulk of the world's gold, dictated the terms. A conference of 44 nations agreed to peg their currencies to the US dollar, while the dollar itself was pegged to gold. It was a promise of stability. The dollar was as good as gold. Then came the shift. In 1971, the United States abandoned the gold standard. The promise was broken, the anchor was cut. Logically, the world should have moved away from the dollar, but they didn't. The dollar remained the world's currency of choice. This is the trap of convenience. By 1971, the world had gotten so used to doing business in dollars that it was simply easier than switching to anything else. The dollar is incredibly liquid, meaning it is easy to buy and sell things all over the world without friction. The US banking system proved to be efficient, making it cheaper for businesses to transact in dollars than in their own local currencies. We traded sovereignty for efficiency. We accepted a master because the master made trade seamless. But this convenience created a fatal vulnerability. By routing the world's wealth through one single channel, we gave one single nation the ability to turn off the tap. Most people believe that money travels like a physical object, that when you send a wire transfer, your digital coins fly across the ocean into someone else's vault. That is a comforting fiction. The reality is far more bureaucratic and far more controlling. To understand how the trap works, we must look at the plumbing hidden beneath the floorboards of the global economy. Let's dismantle a typical international transaction to see where the power actually lies. Imagine a Canadian lumber company selling boards to a home builder in France. On the surface, this looks like a bilateral deal between Canada and France. two sovereign nations, two independent businesses. Logic dictates that the money should move directly from a Canadian bank to a French bank. But in the dollar-denominated world, there is no straight line. Because this transaction is priced in US dollars, the buyer's bank in France and the seller's bank in Canada cannot just swap cash. They must settle the payment through a third party. They must use what are called correspondent banks located inside the United States. This is the invisible detour that controls the world. The French bank sends instructions to its correspondent bank in New York. The Canadian bank does the same with its correspondent bank in New York. These American banks hold accounts directly at the United States Federal Reserve. The money is transferred seamlessly between these Federal Reserve accounts. It is a digital ledger entry, a shift of zeros and ones on a server located on American soil. Why does this matter? Why is this technicality the key to global dominion? Because of a legal concept that acts as a geopolitical weapon, touching U.S. soil. The moment that transaction is processed by the correspondent bank, even for a millisecond, the United States government declares that the money has technically entered its territory. The United States says the use of these correspondent banks means every transaction technically touches U.S. soil. This gives the U.S. legal jurisdiction over a trade deal that, on paper, had nothing to do with America. It compels foreign countries and foreign corporations to abide by American laws. It does not matter if the trade is legal in France. It does not matter if it is legal in Canada. If the money moves through New York, it is subject to Washington's rules. This system was originally sold as a mechanism for efficiency. The U.S. banking system is very efficient, and these correspondent relationships make it cheaper for businesses to buy and sell in dollars. But efficiency is the bait. Control is the hook. By funneling the world's commerce through this specific choke point, the United States gained the ability to monitor money laundering and corruption. But they also gained the ability to see everything. Every wire, every payment, every settlement leaves a footprint in the Federal Reserve's backyard. For decades, this plumbing operated quietly in the background. It was the boring infrastructure of globalization. But the plumbing was never neutral. It was a dormant network of control, waiting for a hand to turn the valve. You are not just using a currency, you are renting space on a payment network owned by a foreign power, and as any tenant knows, the landlord has the keys. The world accepted this arrangement because the dollar was seen as a safe counterparty. But safety is relative. When you centralize the entire planet's clearing system into one city and subject it to one set of laws, you create a single point of failure for anyone who dares to disagree with the landlord. The plumbing is not just pipes, it is a noose, and for a long time, the noose was loose. But what happens when someone decides to tighten it? We are about to leave the era of passive observation and enter the era of active weaponization. The system was built to flow, but it was also built to freeze. And the man who decided to freeze it didn't just want to stop money launderers. He wanted to bring entire nations to their knees. For over half a century, the dollar system was like oxygen, invisible, essential, and seemingly neutral. But after September 11th, the United States realized that oxygen could be cut off. The era of passive banking ended. The era of financial warfare began. After the 9/11 attacks, Washington used the power of the dollar to advance its foreign policy goals with a new ferocity. The initial idea was defensive, to cut out the sources of funding for terror organizations. The U.S. used its control of the dollar to increase surveillance of global money flows. The plumbing we discussed in the previous section became a wiretap. Every transaction was now a piece of intelligence, but surveillance was just the beginning. The system quickly evolved from a listening device into a weapon of mass destruction. Enter Donald Trump and the strategy of maximum pressure. In 2018, the United States withdrew from the Iranian nuclear deal. This was not just a diplomatic exit, it was a declaration of economic siege. The sanctions put in place included banning dollar transactions with Iranian banks. This is where the trap snapped shut. Under this system, the United States demonstrated a terrifying absolute power. If a business or a country tries to trade with a sanctioned entity in dollars, the U.S. has the power to cut off its access to U.S. currency. Think about the implications. It didn't matter if a European company wanted to legally buy oil from Iran. If they used the dollar system to pay for it, Washington could freeze them out of the global economy entirely. The U.S. was no longer just policing its own borders, it was policing the world's wallet. Trump used this dominance to exert maximum pressure on the Iranian economy, forcing it into isolation. But if you think this weapon is reserved only for sworn enemies, look at what happened to Iraq, a supposed ally. When political tensions rose and Iraq stated they wanted to throw U.S. troops out of the country, the response from Washington was swift and brutal. The U.S. did not threaten with tanks. They threatened with bank accounts. The U.S. said, "We'll cut you off from your dollars in the U.S. system." This was a revelation. It stripped away the illusion of national sovereignty. The message to Baghdad and to every capital city watching was cold and clear. You may have your own flag, your own parliament, and your own army, but your money lives in our house, and if you try to kick our soldiers out, we will turn off the lights on your entire economy. The dollar was no longer just a medium of exchange. It had become a leash. Donald Trump didn't hide this power, he brandished it. He showed the world that the global trading system wasn't a public utility, it was American property. By openly using the currency as a bludgeon against both rivals and partners, the United States achieved short-term dominance. They forced compliance. But in doing so, they committed a strategic error that historians may one day view as the beginning of the end. They proved to the world that reliance on the dollar is an existential risk, and when you point a loaded gun at someone's head long enough, they don't just put their hands up, they start looking for a way to disarm you. Newton's third law states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. In geopolitics, the reaction is not always equal, but it is inevitable. By turning the global financial system into a battlefield, the United States didn't just hurt its enemies, it terrified its friends. The weaponization of the dollar created a paradox. The harder the U.S. squeezed, the more the rest of the world began to slip through its fingers. The resistance didn't start in hostile territories like North Korea, it started in the boardrooms of America's closest allies. Some EU countries openly opposed the U.S. sanctions against Iran. They realized that today the target was Tehran, but tomorrow it could be Berlin or Paris. To protect themselves, the European Union began developing a euro-backed system designed to facilitate trade between Europe and Iran without sending money across borders. This was a desperate attempt to engineer a workaround to the U.S. system. The goal was simple: build a financial channel that the eyes in Washington could not see and the hands in New York could not touch. They are not alone. India, a rising economic giant, already has an alternative payment system in place that it is using to do business with Iran. According to investigations, this system has been used to facilitate transactions with sanctioned entities, bypassing the American dragnet entirely. These are not just isolated rebels, they are architects of a new parallel reality. For decades, the U.S. relied on the assumption that there was simply no alternative to the dollar, but necessity is the mother of invention. Now, other countries are actively developing alternative systems that could chip away at the dollar's dominance. Notice the phrase, chip away. It is not a sudden explosion. It is a slow, methodical erosion. It is the sound of termites in the foundation of a skyscraper. This fragmentation bothers the United States deeply because the U.S. is trying to exert maximum pressure on its rivals. But you cannot exert pressure if the pipes are leaking. As these alternative payment systems grow, the threat of cutting off access to U.S. dollars becomes less terrifying. We are witnessing the early stages of a decoupling. In the future, it is not clear how strong the U.S. threat will remain as other countries continue to chip away at the power of the dollar. And here lies the ultimate danger for the American empire and for your portfolio. If the power of the dollar falls, it could hurt the United States' ability to control the global trading system. The moment the world realizes it can trade oil, technology, and weapons without touching the greenback, the artificial demand for U.S. currency evaporates. When that demand vanishes, the trillions of dollars held overseas will come flooding home. The value of the currency in your bank account is tied to this global dominance. If the system breaks, the valuation breaks. The cracks in the dam are already visible. The water is seeping through. The only question remaining is not if the dam will burst, but how long we have until the deluge begins. The system is fragile, the exits are being built, and the clock is ticking. The global financial system is not a free market. It never was. It is a dragnet, and for 80 years, the rope has been held in Washington. We spent decades believing that globalization was about open trade, but the reality is that we have been operating inside a jurisdiction that we did not vote for. Donald Trump did not break this machine. He simply showed us where the self-destruct button is located. By pulling the lever of sanctions, he revealed that your access to the global economy is not a right. It is a privilege that can be revoked at any moment. Now, the consequences are arriving. The dominance of the dollar is being threatened by the very power it tried to project. Nations are not just watching, they are leaving. They are building the lifeboats because they know the ship is taking on water. When faith in paper currency dissolves, history always retreats to real value. The exits are being paved and the monopolies are fracturing. The history of currency is the history of collapse. The question is not if the current order will end. The question is when.